Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. This morning we are going to look back at the 1-0 defeat to PSG in the Champions League semi-final, first leg at the Emirates last night. Not the ideal result, and certainly aspects of the performance will have raised some questions or caused a bit of worry along the way. But I do think while this is a game that could potentially have been more emphatic in terms of the scoreline for PSG, it's also one that could very easily have finished 1-1. We had some chances we didn't take. We had a goal disallowed. So there were some fine margins at play, I think, on both sides. You have to hold your hands up and say it could have been better for PSG. It also could have been better for us. And I do think it is an interesting game to go into, an interesting occasion to look back on. Obviously, there is a second leg next week in Paris. It's all still to play for. 1-0. We're very much alive in this tie. So why don't we just delve right into it? And with me to do that this morning from the Gooner Talk and from Football London, it is Tom Canton. Good morning, Tom.
Hey, how you doing, man? You okay?
I'm okay. You know, I think we could all be a little bit better this morning based on the expectations and the hopes that we had going into last night's game and, you know, the occasion, the potential for history, all that kind of stuff. It didn't quite go as planned, I think it's fair to say. Nevertheless, I think we're alive. We're not in terrible shape. And there's plenty to unpack from this particular game. I want to sort of put on the back burner or the side burner or whatever you want to call it, some talk about the atmosphere and the fans for a little bit. But, you know, going into the game, everyone's up for it, everyone's excited, and then it starts, and PSG, I think, created an aura of anxiety because of, A, how they played, the fact that they scored very, very early, 3 minutes in, they get a goal through Ousmane Dembele, and the opening 25, 30 minutes or so of this game played out in a way I really did not expect, because it is a long time since I've seen anyone do to Arsenal what PSG did to Arsenal last night. And your people's mileage may vary on whether that was all down to PSG or whether it was to do with Arsenal being below par, maybe a little from column A, a little from column B. But I have to say, they were just so impressive.
Oh, without a doubt, you know, and I think Arteta said that in the post-match press conference. He mentioned, you know, you can talk about periods of the game that you dominate, but this PSG team, you cannot dominate all game. They will have control. They will have possession. They will be dangerous. And it was such an intense start from them. And it was almost like they were the home team. But if you ignored kind of the stadium around the actual pitch, it was like PSG were the home side from in those opening minutes, and they had not read the script of what was meant to happen, you know, on the evening at all. And we knew about their threat. We knew about how direct they are, how they utilise the wide areas very aggressively, how their technical midfielders like to get the ball into those areas as quickly as possible. And unfortunately for Arsenal, and what again Arteta made reference to in his post-match presser, was an issue with the setup within the first 15 to 20 minutes that he had recognised almost immediately, that he didn't want to comment on after, which has left us obviously plenty of chance to discuss what we think that might be. But from what I've gleaned from where I was sitting and the little that I've been able to kind of look back in the few hours of being awake this morning before we jumped on, is that we just seemed so open to what they were doing, and we looked disjointed, and there were gaps opening in the midfield in particular that allowed them to play the ball into these dangerous half spaces, particularly for Kvaratskhelia in for the goal, that you just haven't really seen from Arsenal this season. We're usually so organised and so good at closing down particular spaces and not allowing teams to exploit our weaknesses, that it seems so alien, and I think maybe that in some way shocked the team as the game started.
Maybe so. I mean, look, you concede a goal after 3 minutes in a Champions League semi-final, and it is going to take the wind out of your sails a little bit. I think that's inevitable. It's human nature. Everyone has these hopes going into the game, and then 3 minutes in, you're a goal down. There were, I'm not going to say shades of 2009, but I remember the pomp and ceremony before the semi-final against Manchester United in 2009. the flags, whatever it was going on, and then we're a goal down in like 10 minutes, whatever it was. I think it was the Ronaldo free kick. You know, so your mind goes there as a fan. I think for the players, it's quite distinct because, you know, they've no living memory of that, really. It's not something that impacts them. But as fans, I think it has an impact. And I'm curious, actually, what you think. We might as well talk about this before we talk about the goal. When he talked about something that was missing in those opening 15, 20 minutes, I've seen it speculated it's Arsenal not winning their duels. Were we pressing a little bit too high? Was the press not coordinated enough? You know, what was the thing that he said he changed? Was there like a consensus when you guys were talking in the press conference room afterwards when, you know, he wouldn't be that forthcoming on what he said he had changed, but, you know, talking among yourselves with your colleagues in the press box, was there any kind of consensus as to what it was that he did tweak which enabled Arsenal to get back into it? I've had issues with Mikel Arteta's time management before when he talks about things in terms of time. I think he's often a little bit off because, you know, he said 15, 20 minutes and then we got back into it. I don't think it was that at all. I think it was like 30 minutes because David Raya made a big save in the 31st minute from Desiree Doué, which prevented PSG going 2-0 up. So it took us longer than that to get into it. But, you know, what was the thought among you guys as to what that was and how effective it was, maybe how long it actually took to put in place?
Well, I think if, for those that have listened back to the press conference, you'll hear a number of questions from James Benge, from Sam Dean, and I think that tells you that what there is to say that is that there wasn't really a consensus because we kept on asking, trying to find out what he meant. And I sincerely hope that this isn't something that happens again in the future, especially not in the second leg, because it did leave us so exposed and so open. For me, just looking back and trying to look at what it was, I felt there was particularly quite a big gap between Rice and then the two other midfielders in front of him, in Moreno and Odegard. And that space was quite wide, more so than it is when you've got Partey there and Rice. Lewis Skelly came quite far over to the right-hand side as well on a number of occasions that I noticed. And obviously that's not necessarily too much of a bad thing because they were tending to go down the left towards Kvaratskhelia in those opening moments. So you can see why maybe they shifted over. I also think that Saka's tracking back wasn't necessarily as intense as what it usually is. There was a couple of moments actually where I noticed Odegard really shouting at Bukayo to push and to press and to get up into a more advanced role to kind of box PSG in certain moments. And he wasn't really responding to it. It took a little time, and there was a few times I noticed Arteta as well shouting at Bukayo Saka on the right-hand side when he was on the same side as him to come back and to defend. So B grew into the game, definitely, but I think he started the game a little bit slowly. And I think that all those disjointments, if that's even a word, kind of opened up this opportunity for PSG to really open up the spaces more. Players like Kvaratskhelia are incredibly good on one-on-one situations. And then the goal itself, Rice has a moment where he's marking Dembele on the edge of the box. He sees Timber, who is, to be fair, probably, for my money, the best one-on-one defender in the league at the moment, against probably the best one-on-one attacker in Europe at the moment in Kvaratskhelia. And he feels the need that he needs to go and double up. But when he doubles up, that then releases Dembele, and all Kvaratskhelia needs to do is just pass the ball into him, and he's got a free shot at goal. Yeah. So it was really just, I think, a lot of, I don't want to say a lack of preparedness, because they've had 6 games to prepare for the start of this match, but clearly something went very wrong in the opening of this game. Yeah,
6 days rather than 6 games to prepare.
Sorry,
for
6 days.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think the goal is interesting because you're right. I looked at it and I can only surmise that at some point in their pre-game discussions, there was an instruction, maybe, to not let Kvaratskhelia one-on-one with any defender. So if you see him in that position, then we've got to double up on him. We've got to close down the space and make it really, really difficult for him. You know, it's one of those where the moving parts are such that you could say, well, maybe Rice should just stay. Timber have that one-on-one duel, that one-on-one battle. If he gets beaten, he gets beaten. But, you know, otherwise you're closing down the space. He makes the decision, though, to go out. It leaves Dembele free. I think Mikel Merino, maybe, because he's chasing back, could potentially recognize the fact that Declan Rice has moved out, and Merino makes the run. He gets back into the box, but he's sort of not marking anybody. Whereas I think just a little bit more awareness, and he could have moved across to Dembele. So it's not sort of dependent on one player. It's just trying to figure out how it happened, what we could have done differently. The finish, like, it looks lovely, but he shins it. It's just one of those where I think it skims Kivior. If it like takes the tiniest nick off Kivior, it either hits the post and bounces out, or hits the post, or hits Kivior and deflects wide for a corner. It's those really, really fine margins, things Mikel Arteta talked about afterwards in terms of fine margins, and we can talk about that when it comes to moments that they had and moments that we had. But even the goal itself is fine margins. That decision from Rice, Merino not quite engaging, and then the ball, the way it goes in, just in off the post. It's 1-0 to PSG after 3 minutes, and I think that got in the heads of the players. I think it did affect us, because the last thing that you expect, the last thing that you want for your home game after managing Real Madrid so well and being conscious and aware of the threat that PSG pose, the last thing that was in the preparations is, right, we're a goal down after 3 minutes. Now what,
Yeah, and I think that you talk about fine margins and that kind of moment. That's been Arsenal's season. Our luck has, I remember plainly that James Benge question to Arteta at the start of the season, where he feels like, I think he said something on the lines of, do you feel luck has abandoned you this season? And I really do feel as though Arsenal's rub of the green has just not been anywhere close to what any average team might get, whether it's, fine margin offsides that we'll come to, but that's happened in other games, whether it's caused by the referee, whether it's injuries, and of course, whether it's these moments where in the opening part of the biggest game of your season, a shinned shot can hit the back of the net off the post and beat probably the best keeper in certainly in the Premier League at the moment. So I think that Arsenal were, after that point, looking for a response. Obviously, I think the crowd, I know you don't want to go too much on the atmosphere, but it was interesting immediately after that. Arsenal in the Emirates goes two ways after kind of either a red card, or the Saliba one against the own goal, against Leicester, some of the other goals that we've conceded. Sometimes you get this real roar. And I think maybe the part that PSG's fans played into this, because they were so consistent and loud throughout the whole game, and they were like that in the game that we played them earlier on in the season, that made it much harder for kind of the Arsenal fans as a collective to rouse around the team after we just conceded.
Sure.
But sometimes you needed as well the players to lift the crowd. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily think they did that intensely enough after we just conceded.
Yeah, I agree. I want to come back to that though, because I think it's a sort of more nuanced discussion that I want to get into a little bit, because I've seen so much talk about it this morning. But the reaction of the team, I guess, is what we should focus on. And look, I spoke to my brother last night, Liverpool fan, and we were chatting about the game. And obviously Liverpool were knocked out by PSG. And I said to him, they are by some distance the best team that we have played this season. And I include Liverpool in that. Liverpool, who've run away with the Premier League title. I think technically they are just so good. It reminded me, I wrote this in the blog this morning, it reminded me of a game we played in the Nou Camp in 1999, and Arsenal were the double winners, and we had Vieira, and we had Ljungberg, and we had Bergkamp, and we had these fantastic players. We couldn't get near the ball. We just could not get near the ball, and it was sort of a lesson in how technically proficient a lot of European teams are. And I think the gap has closed, obviously, in recent years because of the way teams are developed now and squads are built. But it reminded me of that because they were just popping the ball off here, there, and everywhere. We couldn't get near it. They had some chances. There was, I think, a pretty reasonable shout for a penalty, Timber on Kvaratskhelia, where if it were up the other end, I know the contact is sort of minimal, but he's burst his way through three players. Timber puts an arm out, and I'd be looking at my player to go down there and give the ref a decision to make. The ref made the decision, no penalty. VAR obviously backed that up. But PSG threatened. They kept control of the game. They threatened. Marquinhos had a header on target. Kvaratskhelia had a shot straight at David Raya. There was the Desiree Doué chance, which we talked about, which was on the half-hour mark. So in that
post.
Yeah, they hit the post. Obviously, that was offside because of the way the ball came back from the rebound. But still, it's that, what the fuck is happening here? I remember looking at the clock after about 22, 23 minutes and thinking to myself, you know what, actually, if we get to half-time and it's 1-0, I can kind of live with that based on how this game is transpiring. So in that opening 30 minutes, I know we all have our issues with how Arsenal played, what we did and didn't do. But my primary thought this morning is that sometimes you have to doff your cap to the opposition. You have to say they are very, very good and they played extremely well in that opening half an hour in a way, not that I think was unexpected, but I don't think anybody expected Arsenal to be dominated in that way at home in those opening 30 minutes. And I think you've got to give PSG more credit than criticism for Arsenal, because once we got a foothold in the game, we basically stayed in the game.
Oh, 100%. And I think that we went into this game very much with the consensus that we are going to be playing a better team than Real Madrid. Real Madrid might have better individuals in certain areas, but as a collective, Luis Enrique has got this team playing the best football in Europe at this moment in time. The way in which they pass so quickly into central areas to players in space with just the shift and a turn. I don't know how Nuno Mendes spots the players that he finds in those central areas. It's incredibly impressive about how they do it. And interestingly, Vitinha was interviewed in the press conference. He was asked by the French media about how Arsenal have a greater level of physicality in their midfield as opposed to kind of the smaller technical players that PSG have and possess. And it seemed like he took offence to the question, because he was like, it doesn't matter. Like, 'cause in the sense that we are so good in what we do and we've got so much quality, you don't need to get near us. It doesn't matter how physical you might be, you're not getting near. It's like a boxer, dipping and weaving and diving between the jabs. And I think that you're looking at PSG now in the next game, which will look further ahead. But if Arsenal are to have any chance against this team, they have to be in control of the ball. They have to find a way of getting control of the ball, because if PSG have the ball, as opposed to when Real Madrid had the ball in the last leg, we can be pretty comfortable against that Real Madrid team. And they look quite one-dimensional in how they approach the game and getting the ball to the box. PSG have so many avenues and so many different weapons in their, excuse the pun, in their arsenal to hurt you with, that it makes it so hard for a limited team in terms of the players that we have available to us in our Arsenal squad right now to combat that. And that's the challenge that's coming. I
think that, the main difference for me anyway between PSG and Real Madrid is the midfield. Vinicius, Mbappe, Rodrigo, fantastic players, fantastic talents. And if you're looking at Doué, Dembele and Kvaratskhelia, fantastic players and fantastic talents. But I think what Real Madrid missed in midfield was that technical proficiency that Vitinha, Fabian Ruiz, João Neves, they have that, and that confidence and the ability to control games. It's similar to a game. I remember a couple of years ago, was it the game? It was the game against Newcastle when we won. Maybe we won 2-0 there, and everyone was a bit worried about how we were going.
Scored. Jorginho had a brilliant game.
Jorginho had a brilliant game, and everyone was going, how do Arsenal combat this physical Newcastle midfield, the hard running of obviously Bruno Guimaraes, Joe Linton was in there. They could have had, Pippi Longstaff, whatever his fucking name is, one of those guys, a Joe Willock in there. Everyone was going, Arsenal are not going to be able to match up physically to Newcastle. And what Mikel Arteta did was pick Jorginho. So you combat physicality with technical excellence. And I think that's a big story of how PSG dominated the opening 30 minutes last night. I mean, were you, after sort of half an hour when they'd had those chances, what was your thought about how the game was transpiring? Did you feel like Arsenal were slightly fortunate to be still 1-0, or were the chances that they made? I mean, the Raya save from Doué is actually really, really good, because he's sort of shifting to his left. and has to get down to his right. That's a big moment. It could be a really big moment in the tie. We'll talk about some saves from Donnarumma now in a second. But, that Raya save, I think, is a big moment from an Arsenal perspective, and maybe the point at which or after which we started to sort of claw our way back into things.
Yes, I've watched a few of PSG's recent games against some of the teams that have got results against them, like Nantes and Nice, for instance. And every game that PSG play, and it includes the Liverpool game, that they dominate in terms of chances. Like the Nice game that they lost, I think they had 32 shots. So they're very dominant, but they're not very clinical as a team, and they miss a lot of opportunities that they have. And that was the sense I was getting at that point, 30 minutes in, was they've had kind of that period. They've scored a goal, which was big, and certainly how it interrupted our flow and our introduction to the game and our intention about how we might start this game, and probably scrapped a little bit of our plan, if you like. But I was thinking 30 minutes in that we are going to gradually grow back into this. And can we weather this storm? Chances will begin to come. And that is what happened. Arsenal did start to grow into the game. We did start to create some opportunities. There was that moment on the right-hand side where Saka beats Nuno Mendes, and then the linesman flags in. I was apoplectic. It was right in front of me, in front of the press box, and it was a horrendous moment. I'm thinking, why? Why are you blowing? Why are you waving? It was a classic kind of European foul to be given. I don't think necessarily you would see that in the Premier League. One of the differences I don't necessarily like about the UEFA and Premier League officiating, but that moment was big. There was a chance where Martinelli kind of stretched for that cross from the left-hand side, but we were growing, So at that point, I was still relatively calm, because I felt as though, having watched those games that PSG had played, that they are wasteful and they go through patches in games and they go through phases in games. And Enrique talked about that after the match in his press conference as well. And he was very open to the point of saying it could have gone very differently. It could have been a very different scoreline to what it ended up being, and we'll come on to that. Yeah.
I think that Martinelli chance, he probably would have been offside on the replays. That one at the back post, it was Saka actually moving over to the left-hand side who provided the cross in there. There was a shout for a penalty. A decent bit of football, and Marino maybe not quite quick enough to get the shot away, or just waiting for the ball to come across him. Yeah. João Neves got in. It was one of those where in real time you're going, ooh, that's a penalty. You see the replay, though, and he does get a nick on the ball. It's good defending in there. And then, of course, there is the Martinelli moment, where Miles Lewis-Skelly, who, by the way, people were singing his praises about what he did against Real Madrid. I think last night he was just as good again. He's playing against Hakimi for a lot of the time, and dealt with him really, really well. But Lewis-Skelly, just that positive influence, drives forward, plays a lovely pass inside the defender into Martinelli. It's one of those where he's looking for that finish into the far corner. The goalkeeper makes a save. I have sort of thoughts on these two chances, because I think probably we need to discuss the two chances together, right? Sure. I know there's another moment before that in the second half, but when we talk about fine margins, the Martinelli chance and also the Leandro Trossard chance, which comes from Declan Rice doing a brilliant job in midfield, driving from deep, playing Trossard in. I think you can make a very good case that both of these are excellent saves from Gianluigi Donnarumma.
Yep.
But also that at this level, if you want to win the Champions League, if you want to take a step up and win the biggest trophies, as a team, you need to be lethal with these moments in these games against that kind of quality of opposition. So I might go into the nuts and bolts of what I think about these two chances in a second, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on those opportunities anyway from an Arsenal perspective.
Yeah, so as I alluded to, a moment ago, I got the sense that eventually those chances would come, and they did. And when Martinelli is laid through brilliantly, and just so I have a second on MLS as well.
Yeah.
he plays on the edge, doesn't he? Like, he's one of those players that plays off the shoulder of players at times and will happily take a physical battle in possession of the ball to spin not just one, but often two players and run into space, as he did, and still under pressure finds the perfect weight for that ball and the timing of the pass as well for Martinelli. But on that chance, it's a Martinelli moment that we've seen so many times, if we're being very honest and brutal. He goes through roller coasters of form where at times those chances will come to him and he will put them away. But I would argue that over the course of his time with Arsenal, and he is one of the most senior players in this group, more times than not, I am not banking on him finishing those opportunities. And that is where the conversation around the evolution of this Arsenal team in its current form and where can we get those extra goals from, that's when we start having the conversation about the wide forward, particularly on the left-hand side. And can we bring in a presence that can mirror as much, or at least close to what our right-hand side can bring with Saka? Because Martinelli is not on the same level as what Bukayo Saka is on. If that chance is on the right-hand side, I'm much more confident with Saka being in that situation than I am with Martinelli being in that situation. And he needs to be able to find a way of bending that shot further from Donnarumma's arms as he outstretches, and that shot should either be slightly higher, so it's harder for Donnarumma's arms to reach up, or it's slightly a wider curling effort finessed into that right-hand side netting, as we've seen Saka do so many times from the right to the left-hand side of the goal. And then, do you want to talk about Trossard as well together?
Yeah, let's. I mean, I agree with you about Martinelli, by the way. I think, it is a good save. It is a good save.
Yeah.
But I want my left-sided attacker to make the goalkeeper work harder to make that save. It's not that I say he has to absolutely 100% score there. I think you have to give the goalkeeper credit. He's a fucking gigantic man.
Yeah.
And it is difficult, to get the ball beyond him. However, I'm sort of with you on this wider discussion around Martinelli's finishing. It can be great, but it can also be a little bit below par. And I think maybe for me in that moment, it's a little bit below par. The Trossard one, right?
Yeah.
Again, I think this is an outstanding save. I really do. I think it's a brilliant save because he gets fingertips on it. And there's not a lot that Trossard does wrong because his control is good. He gets it onto his left foot, which I think he has to do. And we've seen him score goals with his left foot before. If I'm going to be super, super picky, and I admit this is maybe me being super picky about this, that finish has to be cleaner. Because what happens is he hits the ball into the ground, and I think the bounce is what allows Donnarumma to make the save. I'm thinking of the goal he scored pretty recently.
Ipswich.
That one, but was there one against Everton?
Yes, through the keeper's legs, I think.
Yeah, so he gets the ball, and it's on his left-hand side, and he fizzes in this really low, clean shot with his left foot, and it skims the surface, and it goes in, and it's a goal. And look, I'm not really blaming Trossard here, but I'm just talking about the need for Arsenal, if we're talking, as you say, about development and the next steps and what can we do to be better, what can we do to get ourselves over the line in the competitions we really want to win. Those are the moments where I think you've got to produce the kinds of finishes that keepers just can't get near.
So I think that chance comes from, and the reason why it doesn't go the way of the Ipswich and the Everton one is that his final touch he takes before the shot is slightly over, and that means he's stretching when he goes to take that shot, and he can't get the same purchase as he wants. He's obviously in this chance more running through, whereas obviously in the Ipswich game it was a short corner, he's inside, he can take that touch cleaner. The Sterling pass to in the Everton game, again, he was under much less pressure at that time, so he had more time on the ball. But in these moments, in the Champions League semi-final, you are going to have far less time for your opportunities, and you do need to be lethal. And he isn't left-footed, and maybe this is an unfair comparison, but if it's Kvaratskhelia, I'm backing Kvaratskhelia to take that opportunity in that moment. Yes, on his stronger foot, but even on his weaker foot, you could argue. Even somebody like, Barcola, who came on later in the game, he scored plenty of goals. Dembele, you could argue as well. These levels of players, that I rank personally higher than that of Trossard. I'd look at them finishing that opportunity.
Well, I mean, Barcola missed a huge one.
True, it's a very good point. That
not to undermine you here. I think
that's fair.
I think as well. We are probably desperate to see how this could have gone differently and could have gone better. Like I said, I don't think either of them are glaring misses. The Trossard one in particular, like I said, it's an incredible save. I'm just trying to think of a way that we could have scored that goal, and that's my thinking. It's just the finish wasn't quite there. And he actually is somebody who, in that position, I would feel pretty confident about hitting the back of the net. Even with his wrong foot, I think he is one of the more two-footed players that we have in the squad. But look, it is fine margins. Those were very, very fine margins. I think it does, though, speak to that wider discussion that Arsenal fans have been having for a little while about the left-hand side and how can we improve there. We have a sort of once-in-a-lifetime talent in Bukayo Saka over on the right, so it's hard to replicate that on both sides of the pitch. But I do think it is, when I think about how we can be better from an attacking perspective, the left-hand side, that left wing position, is the one beyond striker, which of course everybody is shouting right now, is the one where I think you can make the argument that we need to look at if we are going to upgrade.
And what's interesting about who PSG have on the left at the moment, Kvaratskhelia is a player that they signed in January. They recognised, of course, that I rate Barcola very highly, because I just ignored the fact that he missed a 1-on-1 later on in the game.
He would have been offside anyway, but
but they recognise that with Doué and Barcola, and of course Dembele, who is naturally not necessarily thought of as a centre forward, he's been playing there because he's been so good. But Gonçalo Ramos, of course, they did bring in Kolo Muani, who since have loaned out to Juve, who you could argue maybe ironically could have been somebody Arsenal may, if they wanted a loan, could have gone for in January. There's a few. I think the PSG defeat here brings about a few uncomfortable conversations. We'll come on to some of the other players, which I think are also involved in those uncomfortable conversations. We've not really discussed January too much, in this latter part of the season, as we've smashed Real Madrid, etc. But I can't help but think when, Trossard is missing that opportunity, Martinelli is missing that opportunity, and I'm looking to the bench and I'm thinking, well, if we have a late flurry of chances, who are we going to have to bring on? Well, you got Nwaneri, who, yes, scored against Ipswich, but at the end of the day is a 17-year-old kid with a lot of talent. I think he'll have a great career with us, but in the last month or so, not necessarily has had too great of an impact when he has come off the bench. And then, of course, there's Raheem Sterling, who I have absolutely zero faith in doing anything ever for us. So I cannot help but have that uncomfortable feeling in me again of looking back at January as a missed opportunity. And while the league looked like it had gone still at that point, even though there was still a chance, the gap was still big, but Champions League was a big opportunity then, and that could have been a time where Arsenal could have added something like PSG did that could have changed the game for them. Yeah,
listen, we had the discussion about January over and over, but you look at the bench and they're bringing on Barcola and Zaire Emery, Gonçalo Ramos, who we'll come to in a moment. And we have, as you say, Nwaneri, who's 18, Raheem Sterling, who's toast, unfortunately. And then you've got, a couple of academy kids who aren't really at the level or shouldn't be on the bench for a Champions League semi-final. I know we've got some injuries, but that whole discussion about squad building is something. But I do think it played a part in that second half where, you're looking at your ability to change a game or change the dynamic of a game or to give a defender maybe something different to think about from the bench, which PSG did, and it actually was quite effective for them because Dembele went off and Doué went off. They brought on Ramos, they brought on Barcola, and those guys were involved in big moments for PSG, whereas we didn't really have anything. Maybe you could make an argument that Nwaneri could have been introduced for Odegard, who I think had a quiet game, a disappointing game, when we know what he's capable of. Maybe there's an argument there. I thought it was quite interesting that when Nwaneri came on, Bukayo Saka shifted infield and Nwaneri went to the right-hand side. So I do wonder if that's something they've been working on a little bit in training. We didn't talk, we'll come to those PSG chances now in a sec, but we didn't talk obviously about a moment that I think could have sparked the game into life and sparked the stadium into life. The goal, in inverted commas, that Mikel Merino scores with a header. Listen, I fully expected the Arsenal players to be onside there. because they practice that stepping forward, stepping back, and then going again. The delivery from Declan Rice is excellent. We maybe saw an aspect of PSG's game, which is a weakness, which is the goals that they concede from set pieces. They've conceded a lot of goals from set pieces this season. Marino heads home. Everyone thinks it's 1-1. It's quite early in the second half. Here we go. And then we have not only the goal disallowed, but the length of time that it took to disallow that goal, I found a bit strange, given that when it played out, it looked like Marino was fairly significantly offside in the grand scheme of things. You know, sometimes it's razor thin, other times it's pretty obvious. It looked pretty obvious, but it took quite a while. So to have the goal disallowed and for it to take that long to be disallowed was something of a double whammy.
Yeah, it almost felt like we conceded a goal rather than just having scored. But that was the sense that you got, you know, that sinking feeling in your stomach when it is looking like it's going to be ruled out. You know, I was in the overflow section of the press box because it was, as you can imagine, the applications for the game from press were beyond anything we've ever seen. And I didn't happen to be in a section of the overflow that had the benefit of any replays. Now, I know in UEFA competitions you don't get actually shown the process of VAR, obviously, when it's ongoing, but there was just like this frantic. I'm turning around, I'm looking at Benji behind me, going, "What's going on?" Trying to find out what's happened, and that no one really knew. And then when it obviously looks like it's going to get, I mean, Donnarumma's already holding the ball. He feels pretty confident it's going to be ruled out, and the referee starts to walk back towards him, and then puts his hand up, and it just extinguished any kind of hope that the fans may have had at the start of that we would have started in the perfect way. And it took a little while again before I think we got our next chance after that.
That was Trossard's chance, about 10 minutes later.
Yeah, it was about 10 minutes until we got that next major chance. And that would have been, again, it almost felt like, again, another metaphor of Arsenal's season where the rub of the greens not fancied us. But you have to look internally and you have to say, as you rightly pointed out, you've got to be on side there. You've practiced this week in, week out in the training ground. I always feel a little bit uncomfortable with the way they set up with these free kicks where they're all clearly offside and then they run back in, because this is the risk you take, that you're always potentially going to be, you know, you might make a run to go back inside, you get blocked off by a PSG defender that you're trying to get back onside and you happen to be the guy that heads the ball in, and that's kind of what happened with Moreno. But we've seen it. I remember the Martinelli cross for Saka against Fulham. I remember the Havertz goal. Tiny marginal moments in this Arsenal season in the league and in Europe where goals have been ruled out for offside, where we think they're huge moments in games, and all of those games, obviously we've failed to win them after those marginal offsides, which I don't know if is a trend in itself, but that could have been massive for us. If we'd have got that, I think most people would bank on Arsenal going on to win the game. Yeah,
or at least giving yourself a better platform next week in Paris. It is deflating, it was very deflating for that to go in and to think you're back in it and then for it to be ruled out. But I think as well, we have to analyse this second half, and there comes a point where it's 1-0 and you want Arsenal to score, and a goal would be valuable, of course, but you're also thinking, right, 1-0 actually isn't terrible going into an away leg. What would be terrible is 2-0. Concede another goal and you're in big, big trouble in Paris in the second leg. So you want to score, but you don't want to overcommit. I have to say, I think we got a bit fortunate. We got a bit fortunate with a couple of moments that PSG had. There was a great tackle by William Saliba on Hakimi in the box. That's just an outstanding piece of defending from him, but it showed that PSG were threatening. There was the Barcola chance, which we mentioned, where he goes through on goal and just puts it wide. But in the replays, which I'm sure you've seen at this point, it looks like Gonzalo Ramos is offside in the build-up to that. So that probably would have been ruled out. Yeah. The other one, though, I think is the Ramos chance himself. And I've looked back at this morning. Look, I don't have the benefit of semi-automated offside. I do have the benefit of eyes. And just pausing the video where the ball is being played versus the body shapes of Saliba and Ramos, I think he's onside. I really think he is onside. He goes through, has a little bit of a toe poke, smashes off the bar. And we got a bit fortunate there. You know, you could maybe with the naked eye, we don't see an angle where perhaps he's just slightly leaning offside, but he looks onside to me. You know, if you ask me right now, put your house on whether that guy's onside or not, I would say onside. And that means we got fortunate not to be 2-0 down in the very final stages, because that was like 85 minutes, I think it was. So if you let another goal in at that point, it's almost self-sabotage, isn't it? So you can talk about the fine margins from an Arsenal perspective, the chances that we had, the chances maybe we could have done better with. But I think you also have to acknowledge that PSG could easily be going into the second leg with a 2-goal lead.
100%. And that's why I felt at half-time I didn't leave the stadium entirely gutted, to be honest, because I realised very quickly how much worse it could have been on the night. And I know that teams can have great days and really poor days, and I felt like this was a combination of PSG having a brilliant game and us not being on it as we usually have been. And that meant for me that a 1-0 defeat in a 2-legged tie was not an entirely awful result in the context of the game. I felt that we played the second half like the second half of the second leg rather than the second half of the first leg. And there was a real desperation to try and make sure that we got a goal at home, and that nearly cost us, because it did open up spaces for PSG to attend to. That the management of the game in the second half is a little under question. I think the Ramos chance is so strange, because it's almost like he doesn't think he's onside when he gets the ball. And it's an odd choice of shot as well that he takes, where he goes with the toe poke, because I think he can get that onto his right foot and just slam it across Raya into the bottom left-hand corner. I think he's got the time to do that. So it was really odd, I felt, the type of shot that he took for that, quite thankfully in the end. It was really well executed, but slightly just over here onto the bar. And you're thinking in that moment that we don't need to overcommit, and we don't necessarily have to throw on, attacking changes. And if anything, you could maybe look to shore things up slightly by bringing on we'd have brought on Ben White for Timber. That was a like-for-like change. And if anything, White I'd look at as more of an overlapping fullback compared to Timber. Timber's very good at supporting Saka and can be really good in those offensive areas, but Ben White is more engaged when trying to overlap the right-sided player, and there was some openings there. And I think that you could argue, if we wanted to change things structurally toward the end of that game, I don't know if you wanted a wider conversation about Odegard as well and his contributions, but I felt if there was a player to take off to try and change things, it probably was Odegard with the game that he was having. I felt that we struggled not having a Mikel Merino type figure up top throughout the majority of the game. And I know that we are lacking in options to try and, with Partey suspended and Jorginho unavailable, to fashion a way of getting Mikel Merino up there without losing too much in midfield. I really liked Zinchenko's performance against, Ipswich, granted. I've liked some of Tierney's contributions as well. And there is this broader context, and I'm curious to know what you think about it. This idea that Lewis Skelly, with his physicality and how he's so good on the ball and his confidence, could there be a scenario where we saw MLS and Rice together and a different left-back brought in to enable Mikel Merino to be released more into an advantageous attacking position?
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I've seen this discussion of Lewis Skelly a lot this season. Like, is he wasted at left-back? Could he be a 6? I can absolutely be talked into the idea of Lewis Skelly playing as a deep-lying midfielder at some point, but not now. Not this season necessarily, and not in a game like this. I think it just changes too much a little bit structurally for me, but I'd have no confidence about him being redeployed there at some point, and I do think maybe that might be where he ends up. I would have been a little bit cautious about Zinchenko in a game like this, just because he really hasn't played a great deal. Tierney at left back, perhaps. Going back to what we talked about, I mean, I think with Odegard, where I am with this is like I see a player whose form is way below where we expect it to be and where we've seen from him. What I don't see is a player who's not trying or not engaged. Yeah. So I don't buy into any of this like pop psychology nonsense about he doesn't care, this, that, and the other. I think we have to acknowledge that he's not playing as well as we know he can. I think he would also probably be the first player to say that. I think you could make a counter argument that if you're a player like Martin Odegaard, you are to a large extent reliant on what happens in front of you when it comes to the movement in the centre forward position and the wide players. But is he playing particularly well? No. Did he have a good game last night? No, I don't think he was. I don't think he was, off it. I don't think he was hiding. I've seen people suggest that. I don't agree with that at all. I just don't think his form is good right now. What I think is quite interesting is the idea that when Nwaneri came on, I realize it was quite late and maybe it was just like a little bit of a Hail Mary, was the idea of Saka going into that position, Nwaneri playing on the right-hand side. Is that something that we could look at some point? Because the reality is, the way this squad has been built, whatever you think about Martin Odegaard, he is the only guy that we really have for that position, because we let Smith Rowe go, we let Vieira go, we didn't bring anybody else in. We don't have another, nominally another creative midfield player, and people can make the argument for Nwaneri if they want, and I think that's fine, but he's 18, he's done exceptionally well this season, but I think what we've seen from him is that, it is difficult to be really, really consistent when you're an attacking player and you are judged on output, right? Goals and assists is how you judge players in attacking positions, and Odegaard, I think, as well, is being judged a little bit on goals and assists. And I'm not taking anything away from Miles Lewis-Skelly here, because I think he's been absolutely sensational. But you have a job to do as a defender, which is different than the job you do as an attacking player. So I think we have to question, beyond Odegaard's form, how the squad has been built and what we have in those positions to deal with periods when he's not playing as well as we'd like.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. Did you see the quote by Philip Lahm talking about how you stop players like Bukayo Saka?
Yeah.
He effectively talked about how the best way to stop Bukayo Saka is just to stop the ball getting to him. And while PSG, I don't think necessarily did that in the sense of stopping, because we did get the ball to Saka a lot, particularly in the second half, I felt we did. But he was often kind of, his pathways were very closed off, and he struggled to get into the positions that he likes to. I like the idea of what Arteta's chosen to do there with bringing Saka, because it does get him into those more dangerous positions more often. You've got a player in one area that if you have to isolate somebody, that's not a bad player on that right-hand side to be more isolated, while you've then got Saka creating problems more centrally. The wider context around Odegaard is, I think that from an Arsenal squad building perspective, there's been evidence that Arteta feels that we need more than just him, because 2 years ago we signed Fabio Vieira, who is without a doubt an attacking midfielder. Yes, he's played in a wide position when we've been forced to have to bring him, but there was a recognition there that we needed something more. We needed depth. We needed the ability to cover off injury, or in this case, poorer form from Odegaard. And while we've alluded to a few positions, be that striker in the wide left position, I really would like to see Arsenal be open to the idea of adding a player, not to replace Odegaard, because I think that we can be quite fickle, can't we? He's had two seasons where he's been voted player of the season. He has one season where at the beginning of the campaign he has a really bad injury that he comes back from probably quicker than maybe he should have done, in the benefit of hindsight, and because we didn't have a choice but to get him back because we were already struggling. And he's never really been able to recover from that. And I think he's in desperate need of a break. I don't know. I've heard nothing about these rumours about a potential, need for surgery in the future. Like we saw that one with Ben White, where he had to have like a corrective surgery after an issue with pain. I've not had any info to confirm or deny that, but he certainly is a player that I think needs the summer, needs this season to be over, and needs to be able to give him the chance to go again. I agree with you. It's rubbish that he hides in games. He doesn't. He really does drop deep to look for the ball. He's just not playing in the same Odegaard way that we've loved and enjoyed over the last couple of years, with the quick 5-yard 1-2s with players moving, pass move, flick into the space. It's just not coming off for him, and he's got no respite. And we've got no respite from his struggles. And I think that's where in the summer, and that's where I have sympathy for somebody like Elliot, who's been really banging the drum of an Ebery Eze or somebody like that to have something extra in the forward line and have a quality player to come in for him.
Yeah, I agree completely. There was a late chance for Martinelli, which only sort of copper fastens what we talked about earlier, being lethal, being clinical. He just sort of whacked it over the bar. I know it was
That's
a bit
bigger
tired.
chance than I think most people
I think so as well. Like my first instinct was maybe Nwaneri should shoot because it's a great interception from Rice. Maybe Nwaneri should shoot, but I think he's got a couple of players ahead of him. It's a better chance for Martinelli than people have said. It's edge of the box. You just got to guide that towards top corner. I'm not saying that's easy, but you can't just balloon it over the bar. And that was essentially the last moment we had in the game. I'll talk in a second about the lay of the land going into the second leg. But I do want to come back to this discussion of the fans, right? Which I've seen all over the place this morning, that somehow the Arsenal fans are being criticised for not producing the kind of performance that they did against Real Madrid, right? And I think it's just such a fatuous argument, like somehow fans are being blamed for what the team didn't do, right? There's a context to this as well, right? Against Real Madrid, it's the same fans, more or less. There'll be some, some people in and out, but it's the same fans who were so brilliant against Real Madrid. What is the difference? Well, we didn't concede in the first 3 minutes, and we didn't spend 30 minutes worrying, full of anxiety about what Real Madrid were going to do to us, because although they had the ball, we had a lot of control in the game. Madrid did nothing to try and hurt us. They did nothing to expose us, really. The opening minutes of the game, where they had a couple of chances, were because of mistakes that we made, not because the fact that Real Madrid pulled us apart, right? The goal at 3 minutes just sucks the life out of the crowd. And can I also say, with all due respect, and I said this about the game in Madrid as well, where they were remontada. The crowd are like, up for it. They're going mad. And then you have like a minute silence. Some fucking sad Spanish trumpet music, which I think sucked some of the life out of the crowd. And I think, again, with all due respect, it's an unnecessary minute silence at the game last night, and it'll be unnecessary at the game tonight as well. I'm not don't want to be critical of anyone's religious beliefs or anything like that, but I don't think it's necessary to have that at a game of football like this. And I'm not saying it's responsible for what we did or didn't do in the opening minutes or the opening half an hour. But I think when you hype people up, when you get them, to bring their boots, bring your shin pads, get behind the team, you've got everyone is fucking mad for the occasion. And then you have a minute silence. It's like, well, what are we doing here? And you could hear actually that it was so at odds with what people were feeling that they tried to turn that silence into like applause, like a minute's applause, and that kind of fizzled out. I just don't think it was helpful. And it's not the biggest issue in the world, but I think we talk about percentage differences, 0.5% difference here, there, and everywhere. And I think when people are being critical of the fans in that stadium last night, they are ignoring the context of the game itself and what happened, before the game, the build-up, the silence. All of that played a part. And I think the Arsenal fans came across on TV anyway, really did try to rouse the crowd or rouse the team. And maybe it was a bit too much the other way, where the team were trying to G up the fans rather than producing what we know they can produce on the pitch, which in turn is what gets the fans behind you,
Yeah, for sure. I agree with all of that. With the kind of the minute silence situation, I don't know why you can't just have like black armbands for the game. And then you don't have to
exactly.
Have that silence. You can pay your respects in that way and not have it be an interruption to the match procedure. So, I was in there. I was at both the Real Madrid game and the game last night, and I personally think that the noise in the build up to kickoff was louder in this game than it was the Real Madrid game, and that's saying something because they were both mightily impressive. I appreciate the effort of the Tifo, which is not something that came up in what we were talking about there.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate the effort of the construction, of the setting up of it. Its execution was poor. It wasn't hung correctly. The cannon didn't really fit across the Tifo, and it became a little bit of a meme quite early on. People were laughing around me and pointing out, that it wasn't being hung correctly and that one side was drooping down. And I think the crowd, when we had the red and white colours, that's a greater effect than one hung banner. I thought the Tifo actually in the East Stand was really good. The Make It Happen thing was good. But you could have that and then section that off and have the red and white round. At Real Madrid, it was an impressive Tifo that they hung in that stadium. And they had the colours going around it with fans. The effect was really quite threatening and imposing. And obviously, there were different fan groups that put forward ideas. Whether or not you agree with them, I'm not a particularly big fan of the designs I saw, of the ones that I did see. But the cannon on the red background did not look imposing at all.
No, it's just the cannon on it's a lovely flag. Hang it outside or... Yeah. I agree with you. I think, the sort of coordinated effort with the red and white made the stadium look really, really impressive for the Real Madrid games. And I don't know if it was just a reaction to some of the fact that the designs that were suggested weren't particularly great, so they felt like they had to do something. Maybe as well there's an issue with time and timing where there's not long between the games and there isn't a great deal of time to prepare. But I just can't get behind any criticism of the fans in the stadium because it's human nature. It's human nature to react with a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of anxiety when your team goes down 1-0 in a Champions League semi-final. Like I said at the start, people who were there in 2009 will have gone, not this again. So fans carry the scars of history, whereas the players and the manager don't necessarily because they weren't involved in those things. Whereas we as fans, what did Arsene Wenger say about it? Every defeat is like a scar on your heart. But we have all these scars in our hearts. We have the scardiest hearts in all the land because of what's happened.
It's just
exactly. It's just scar tissue. But we're still pumping away a little bit. And we are, to be fair, still pumping away in this tie. It is 1-0. 1-0 is not a significant scoreline. I think if we had won that game 1-0 last night, we'd say that's good. But this game is far from over. This tie is far from over. I think PSG would be the same. If we had won 1-0, they'd be saying, we get them home. We've got every chance. It's only a goal. You never know what can happen in a game of football. So how you're feeling this morning might just be reflected by your own nature. If you're a glass half empty guy, you will say we've missed the opportunity at home. We could have been 2-3-0 down. PSG were much better than us on the night. And I think that's probably true. They were better than us for a significant portion of the game until we got a foothold, and I think it was pretty even then. But if your glass is half full, you could say, well, it could easily have been 1-1. Marino is a split second from being onside. Genuinely just the length of time it takes you to move your leg, 6 inches, he could have been onside. Trossard or Martinelli could have scored. Those moments could have had a big difference on the game. But it's 1-0. It's all still to play for in the second leg. It is, in inverted commas, half-time, as Mikel Arteta said. So there's a job to do, and Arsenal, I think, can be better. There are ways as well that Arsenal can be better. There's a way, perhaps, of restructuring the team next week, of course, with Thomas Partey back and maybe Mikel Merino giving you more of an outlet up front. So I understand if people are frustrated. I understand if people are disappointed because, I am and I'm sure you are. But I'm not without optimism going into this second leg. I think, you have to let yourself hope. And this game is not out of sight by any means.
Absolutely not. I think that's really well summed up because you look at the game in the women's side of things when they lost that first leg 2-1 and they've gone to Lyon and scored very early and Lyon haven't played particularly well, rocked by an early goal from Arsenal. And I asked Arteta about that in the pre-match press conference if you could use that, and had that been any inspiration to his team. I think it's more relevant now, obviously, being a goal down for that second leg. But we know that it happens. It's rare, it does, that in the semi-final, when you're trading the first leg, that the team can overtime. I think it's only been done twice before. I won't mention one of the teams that managed to do it. But when it comes to the energy that we will have away from home, because weirdly our home form's not been great this season. Like, we haven't played particularly great at home, and it almost felt like, as I said before about the second half performance, we played that occasion like it was the second leg rather than the first leg. And I think maybe going away to PSG with being a goal down rather than protecting a lead, I think the pressure is off you to a degree with that scenario, and I think that will help the players. And if you can have an effect on a home crowd being away from home, as they did, at the Bernabeu, and they'll remember that experience, that can give them a real lift. And so I think that it's still so on for Arsenal. Like, the mood this morning is down. Like, I live in this YouTube-y world, more so than yourself, and it can be a volatile place. And when I did my 8 a.m. show this morning before we recorded this, people were upset. People are down. People are angry. And there's some real visceral frustration. And I think we saw that with some of the things you alluded to earlier in the show that we saw online this morning. There is some real frustration because we've only been here 3 times. And it's a big opportunity, and we feel like, this home game was a real chance, and we've blown it, but we haven't blown it all yet. There was still another half of this tie, and that was the first thing that Arteta said. He said, half-time. He was very calm. It was like, it's half-time, and we've got to be better, and we've got to do things better, and we're going to have, as you pointed out, Partey back, and that's a big, big thing. I think it was even asked to Enrique in his press conference about Partey returning. I think Vitinha was also asked about Partey returning. It seems that they're very well aware of the fact that this is a big thing to have an extra different structure. It's not just about the individual player, but how it changes the structure of Arsenal's setup and how much more comfortable they can be in that. So I'm excited for next week. It helps that I'm going. I'm very glad to inform that our good friend Charles Watts isn't going because he has a bit of a curse in Paris, it turns out. So he's chosen not to go. Good for him.
He's going to go to Butlins or something instead.
Yeah,
it seems to
somewhere.
Seems to be his get out.
It did as well in the first leg against Madrid when he was there. So hopefully that omen can stand true again. Yeah,
I mean, the other thing, just very finally, I suppose one thing that you just said there, and I've said it in the blog this morning, is that this is our first semi-final in the Champions League since 2009. And I'm not saying the occasion got to people, but you gain experience from being at this level of this competition time and time and time again. And I don't think it's the key difference maker, but PSG have been there 4 or 5 times in recent years. And look, they haven't won this trophy. They have that itch to scratch as we do, but that maybe plays a part in how that first leg went. It's a learning experience for us. This is a team and a manager that I think has demonstrated an ability to learn quickly. So hopefully we can do that ahead of the second leg. Mikel Arteta says Arsenal need to do something special in Paris. We absolutely do. Follow the lead of the Arsenal women, score early, bang one in just before halftime, and all of a sudden, it's a different game. We put the shits up them, but we better leave it there for now, though, Tom. Great to have you on. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us, and we'll chat again very soon.
Absolute pleasure as always, mate.
Thank you very much indeed to Tom. You can find him writing about Arsenal for Football London and, of course, on the Gunner Talk TV, his YouTube channel. You will find a link to that in the show notes. So, look, I'm just going to get this podcast out and uploaded and let people have a listen. There is, of course, a game between now and the second leg against PSG. We have got Bournemouth at home on Saturday, a game which I think for most people will be pretty low down their list of priorities. I do think, though, however, that a good result and a good performance against Bournemouth might be useful going into a second leg, particularly after a game when we haven't really played particularly well. So it's about how Mikel Arteta finds the balance there. We'll look ahead to that game a bit later in the week over on Patreon. And again, just a big thank you to to everybody who signed up for our Patreon in April, knowing that every single penny that we made was going to go to charity. So between that and some personal donations to help top things up, we have made €15,000 donations to UNICEF, to Oscars Kids Ireland, to the Arsenal Foundation as part of the Arsenal Vision fundraiser. And this week we will also make our final donation of €15,000 to the Islington Food Bank, doing such great work within the local community at Arsenal. You can find out more about them at their website. If you want to help, if you want to volunteer, if you want to donate, whether it's food or money, you can find ways of doing that pretty easily. So we want to say thank you to everybody who helped us do that during the month of April. It is important to give something back when you have a platform like Arseblog, and there are people in the world, locally and internationally, who could do with the help. If you're in a position to do that, you should do it, which is what we've done. So again, thank you so much to everybody for your help in enabling us to do that. For now though, folks, take it easy. I hope you enjoyed the show. Here's to a much better second leg in Paris, something special in Paris, as Mikel Arteta talked about. For now, take it easy, and we will catch you on the next one.